Go ahead and start. All right. First of all, I want to welcome everybody. We, as Lissa said, we're so thrilled that you're joining us virtually. We very much wish this was in person. We had planned a special HABS participant celebration meeting for this spring, but the world had other plans. So we are excited to be meeting with you this way, and we'll talk about lots of what's going on in HABS right now, but also our plans for the future. So next slide. So I just wanted to give you a snapshot of, we actually have these kind of Zoom meetings several times a week with the Harvard Aging Brain Study team, as you can see, and we actually have more people even than can fit on these screens. But we have found ways to adapt to these challenging times and really continue our progress. And that's one of the main themes of today, is to say that we are not letting this virus and all of the world events that are so impactful right now stop us from our mission, which is to really better understand brain aging and to ultimately defeat Alzheimer's disease before it starts. And we're really working hard and actually trying to take advantage of these times to be able to make progress. So next slide. So as I just mentioned, it's definitely been a very challenging time, and I want to acknowledge many of you who I think have been so impacted by what's going on in the world right now. So as most of you are aware, the COVID-19 viral pandemic required the suspension of our in-person clinical research visits in early March. We actually shut down our visits a couple weeks even before the hospital required it, because we really wanted to prioritize our participants' safety. And unfortunately, this pandemic certainly has disproportionately affected older individuals, and we were aware of that even from the beginning. And it has also disproportionately affected communities of color. And then, of course, the terrible events that we've all witnessed over the past few weeks have also brought racial injustice once again to the forefront and shown a light on the horrible things that have happened, particularly to our African American Black individuals in this country. So we want to take a moment here to voice our strong support from the HABS team for all of our communities of color, and our commitment to work with all of you and around the country to make things better. So even though it's been a very challenging time, again, for all of us, and probably even more for you, next slide, we do have some good news to share. And that's what we had planned for our HABS celebration. So many of you who've been to our participant events in the future are aware that we're funded by the National Institute of Health, in particular the National Institute on Aging. And the way that works is that every 5 years, we prepare a very large research grant, and we submit this to the NIH. We submitted this last May. I think it was 734 pages that fortunately was submitted electronically. And earlier in the middle of all of this challenging time this spring, in April, we received news that we had been officially funded for 5 more years. So we find this thrilling, and we hope none of you are gulping and saying, 5 more years, we've already been in this for 9 or 10 years. But this additional funding really allows us to extend our work in ways that we didn't even think was possible, to be able to follow some of you for even more years and introduce exciting new things into the Harvard Aging Brain study that we were only dreaming about a couple of years ago. We also have some philanthropic support that I want to acknowledge, which has been really important for being able to do some new things in our work. So we believe that this renewal, as well as other funding, will really help us accelerate our quest to understand healthy brain aging, and as I mentioned, ultimately defeat Alzheimer's disease before any of the symptoms even start. Next slide. So just to give you a quick timeline of the history of the Harvard Aging Brain Study. So we were first funded in 2010. And at that point, we were very focused on amyloid using amyloid PET imaging because this technology had become available, and we already knew that some cognitively normal individuals already had amyloid plaque buildup in their brains, and we wanted to understand what this meant for their future and how we might be able to use this information to try to protect people's brains. In 2015, we were very fortunate to receive a second round of funding. At that point, we introduced tau PET imaging. And so we were very excited because we're one of the first groups in the world to be combining amyloid PET imaging with tau PET imaging to try to understand the impact of this on the aging brain. And then in 2020, with this news cycle, we really wanted to focus especially on what I'll refer to as resilience and vulnerability. And what we mean by this, and you'll see some evidence of this in the presentations today, is trying to understand why some people are more vulnerable both to the pathology of Alzheimer's disease and to developing cognitive symptoms, but perhaps most importantly, why some people are resilient. Even in the setting of having changes in their brain of early Alzheimer's disease, they're able to maintain brain function. And of course, that's what we want to maximize. Next slide. So here, I think you've probably seen pictures like this before, but I think they're really the heart of what's special about the Harvard Aging Brain Study, and in particular because of your commitment and dedication to teaching us and undergoing all of those scans. So what we now know is that by the stage of Alzheimer's disease dementia, unfortunately, people already have a lot of amyloid and a lot of tau. And because we can now peer into the living brain, we can start to see evidence of this buildup of amyloid and tau years before people get symptoms. And importantly, our field has to stop arguing about whether it's amyloid or it's tau. Our evidence clearly suggests that these changes work together to, unfortunately, make people more vulnerable to cognitive decline. And this is critically important for prevention trials. So next slide. So here's just a little bit of illustrative way of trying to understand these concepts that we're thinking about in terms of resistance and resilience or versus vulnerability. So up on the top left, where those of you who can see the screen, you can see, unfortunately, a tree being consumed by a forest fire. And that's what we think happens at a certain stage of Alzheimer's disease, where there's a very rapid spreading, particularly of tau, which we think is, unfortunately, the earliest changes that lead to memory after the amyloid is already present. But then on the top right, you can see a very wind-blown tree, but that tree that is still strong and resilient, even though the elements of Mother Nature are working against this tree. And we refer to this as resilience. And the resilience may not be able to change people's likelihood of getting amyloid or tau, but it can change their likelihood of showing symptoms over time. And that's what, again, we really want to focus on over this next renewal of the HAB cycle, so we can better understand how we promote resilience. Next slide. So some of you may have seen the HABs in the news. We're very fortunate. I'll show you in a minute some of these scientific studies that my colleagues have done. But here, it's been very exciting to see work from the Harvard Aging Brain Study being quoted in lay media, not only in the US, but actually around the world. And that's because of the unique pieces of the study, and especially, again, because of our amazing participants who contribute, many of whom have been with us now for 7, 8, or 9 years. And this resilience, some of our work in exercise, some of our work around social interaction, and how we better understand making the brain resilient and ultimately preventing the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease has definitely been something that the lay press has been interested in. And I just want to thank you guys for allowing us to get the word out around the world. Next slide. So here are some of the accomplishments over the past 10 years that I want to share with you. One, we've published over 200 research articles, and I think we're up to 207 because we had something accepted last week. We have shared de-identified data with over 100 researchers around the world, and we have another 10 requests pending right now. I do want to say that these data, your imaging data, your cognitive data, these are de-identified or anonymized, and they are so much anonymized or de-identified that we don't even know who is who on the imaging data, because of course it's very important to our mission to stay blinded to people's amyloid and tau status so that it doesn't bias us in any ways. And that's been a really important feature of the Harvard Aging Brain Study that has allowed us to provide data for future trials. We're also training the next generation of researchers in aging and Alzheimer's disease. And that team photo I showed you at the beginning, many of our younger folks are already going on to graduate school and medical school. People who are fellows, research fellows here, stay on as faculty or go all over the world. And I'm really probably most proud of this, that we can see these young people get very excited by the incredible data you provide and go forward in a career in research. And then finally, perhaps most impactfully, the Harvard Aging Brain Study has directly contributed to the design of Alzheimer prevention trials. Many of you know about the A4 study, which of course is ongoing. It's now in its fifth, almost sixth year. And it will finish up, we hope, in 2022, or probably early 2023 at this point. It's also contributed to the next set of trials that we'll be working on. You'll hear more about that this summer and fall, the AHEAD 3-4-5 study. So it's thrilling to see the incredible data and learnings that we have from the Harvard Aging Brain Study directly translate into trials, and hopefully one day into a successful disease-modifying treatment that will prevent the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. Next slide. So again, we can't really take the credit for any of this because it's you guys being willing to be so dedicated and committed to our study for such a long time, and we hope for another 5 years. There have been 367 individuals who've been through at least the beginning of the Harvard Aging Brain Study data, and that's helped us greatly better understand the aging brain. Next slide. So this is actually a slide that we've updated from that grant application I mentioned earlier. And I love this figure because it actually shows not only how many people we have, but how many people come back every year and help us with so many data points that we acquire. So each one of those dots are people that have been in the Harvard Aging Brain Study and staying through, and each year coming back for their annual visits. And we hope that this will stretch out for a fabulous another 5 years. As you can see, we don't have many dots in 2020 yet because, of course, the recent events have made it impossible for us to, at least right now, be doing imaging and clinic visits, but I'll talk more about that at the end. And across the bottom, you can see there's been over 2,500 cognitive tests, many MRIs, amyloid, FDG, and tau PET. And all of this data has been critically important to helping us better understand the aging brain and, again, one day prevent Alzheimer's disease. Next slide. So I'm going to turn this over right now to Martha Muniz, and you also know her as one of our fantastic HABS study coordinators, and she is going to give you a snapshot of the 275 of you who are active right now in HABS.
Thank you, Reisa. Good morning, everyone. Again, thank you for being here and joining us this morning. We're really happy to see you all connected via Zoom or via your telephones. And so what this slide shows is that of the 367 folks that completed year one, 275 of you are actively participating in the Harvard Aging Brain Study. As you can see to the left, on the graph to the bottom left corner, the average age is 76, with more females than males in this group. You can also see on the bar to your right that the majority have completed at least 12 years of education, with a large number holding higher education degrees. Additionally, over the past 10 years, our team has made tremendous efforts to enroll individuals who are representative of the older population in the greater Boston area. As we continue to strive to improve diversity, almost 3 years ago, we received additional funding to enroll Latinos in our study. So we now have a terrific team across the board that is able to assess English and Spanish speakers. All right, so here are two maps that show that participants commute to Charlestown from primarily the greater Boston area, but some travel a really long way. We want to recognize those of you who drive to us from Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire. On the map to your right, you'll see that some of our participants have actually moved to other states like California, Texas, Florida, and those individuals travel to Boston once a year to continue their participation in our study. This only goes to show that level of commitment within this group, and we cannot thank you enough. So, during the latest visit to our clinic, most of you reported living with loved ones, while a third of you live independently. We would also like to take the time to thank your loved ones and your study partners who range from spouses to neighbors. Now I'll turn it over to Dr. Reisa Sperling.
Yes, so thank you so much, Martha. So as you saw on Martha's slide, it said in the pre-COVID times. And I want to introduce soon Dr. Patrizia Vanini, who had a very good idea about trying to utilize these challenging times to better understand stress and resilience in our wonderful Harvard Aging Brain participants. So I'm going to turn this over now to Dr. Vanini so she can show you a snapshot of a survey that she sent out, and many of you responded to understand what's changing in your lives right now. So please go ahead, Patrizia.
Thank you, Dr. Sperling, and good morning, everybody. So the outbreak of coronavirus disease may be stressful for people, and even though we're all experiencing the same event right now, an individual's perception of how stressful this event is for them is highly variable, and thus the level of stress can be appraised different by different people. So one thing in particular that has been shown to impact and modify a person's perceived level of stress is resilience. And as Dr. Sperling has already mentioned, resilience is defined as the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or a significant source of stress, much like the situation we're in right now, or the ability to bounce back from difficult experiences. Coping is a similar but a little bit different term for resilient, and is also an important characteristic when people are experiencing stressful life events. So stress and resilience are important to the understanding of trajectories of memory, mental health, and age-related brain changes. The purpose of this survey that we sent out was to collect additional information from you on your level of perceived stress, resilience, and the different coping mechanisms or strategies that you might be using. And we're going to compare this to already collected data that we have on you in HABS. We also hope that these data may provide or improve our understanding of how to support older adults navigating stressful situations like this one in the future. Before I'm presenting the results, by the way, it's hot off the press. You're going to be the first one to see these results. I would like to acknowledge the other people that have been working with this survey with me. Madeleine Coupe, which is the clinical research coordinator, and Geoffroy Gagliardi, who is a postdoc in our group. And finally, Martha Muniz is going to finish the COVID-19 presentation by showing you a slide how your responses during the COVID-19 compares to pre-COVID results in HABS. And next slide, please. So a total of 110 individuals, or about 40% from HABS, completed the survey. And the pie chart in the upper left corner shows with how many other peoples the participants are currently living. 27% said that they're living alone, and of the remaining participants, 53% said that they're living with one other person, 7% with 2 other people, 8% with 3 other people, and 5% are living with 4 other people or more. The majority of the participants are living with their spouse and partner, but 20% also have their children, and 5% even have grandchildren in the same household with them right now. We also asked if you personally know anybody who has been diagnosed with COVID-19, which is shown in the green pie chart in the lower left corner. 47% said that they know a relative or a friend that has been diagnosed, and the same amount, 47%, said that they do not know anybody that has been diagnosed with COVID-19. We then had everybody fill out a questionnaire to assess their perceived level of stress right now. The histogram in the right upper corner shows the mean responses for all the participants. As expected, we can see that the level of stress is variable. Most people are falling in the middle, that green belt, but there are people that are actually perceiving low levels of stress right now, indicated in blue, and a small percentage that are also perceiving a very high levels of stress right now, indicated in orange and red. And when we looked closer at the questions, most people reported that they're stressed and they feel fear and worry about the health of a friend or loved one, slightly less about their own health, surprisingly, and less so about their own financial situation. Next slide, please. So studies have revealed that greater levels of perceived stress are associated with poorer health status, quality of life, and higher levels of depression, anxiety, distress, and functional limitations in individuals with disabilities. However, we know that resilience can act as a sort of buffer, and previous research have shown that people with high resilience have better capabilities to heal, stay mentally and physically healthy, and maintain mobility or cognitive function. So to investigate the influence of resilience, we had everybody fill out a questionnaire to assess their level of resilience. The results are shown in the horizontal rainbow histogram in the left upper corner. And as you can see, similar as the perceived stress, there is a variability of people's level of resilience. More importantly, as you can see in the plot, when we looked at the relationship, or when we looked at the relationship between resilience and stress, there is a negative relationship, indicating that people or participants with higher level of resilience are perceiving less stress right now. And this is good news, because resilience has been suggested to be an adaptive process that can be developed, specifically through different coping strategies. So, what coping strategies were related to people with high resilience? That's shown in the figure in the lower left side. Of these, acceptance came out the strongest. That is, people who said that they have been learning to live with this situation or accepted the reality of the fact that this situation has happened had high resilience. On the same line, but in the opposite direction, we found that people that did not endorse self-blame, that is, criticizing themselves, or did not endorse behavioral disengagement, such as giving up trying to deal with the situation or giving up trying to cope, showed high resilience. And finally, and perhaps a bit surprising, humor came up as a predictor of high resilience. That is, people said that they've been turning to humor to make themselves feel better, or trying to maintain their sense of humor as much as possible in this situation. And last, the CDC has released a list of tips on how to cope during the pandemic, as you can see in the upper right corner. And we were curious to see which one, if any, you have been using during this time. We found that a lot of you have been doing number 3, reaching out, taking action to try and help others by sewing masks, donating money, or other supplies. And number 4, taking breaks from watching, reading, or listening to news stories, including social media. And finally, Martha will show you a slide how these results compare to pre-COVID results that we have collected on you.
Thank you, Patricia. All right, so many of you may recognize the question to the left that says, are you bothered by thoughts that you just cannot get out of your head? Over the years, 85% of individuals have reported being able to manage their thoughts and potentially cope with situations easily. This is data that has been captured pre-COVID from the full HABS cohort. Now, it comes as no surprise that during this pandemic, from those who participated in the survey Dr. Vanini just mentioned, more than half have been able to accept the current living situation. On the bars to your right, you can see two items that were asked in the survey. One being, I've been accepting the reality of the fact that this pandemic has happened, and I've been learning to live with it. As you can see, more than half of the individuals have been doing this a lot or to a medium amount. Soon we will be able to explore and compare the outcomes from the survey to pre-pandemic data collected in HABS. This will allow us to understand how coping mechanisms relate to cognitive resilience. I'll turn it over now to Dr. Amariglio, who will speak about the value of remotely captured questionnaires.
Thank you, and good morning to everyone. So we've just heard from Dr. Vanini about the results of a questionnaire that has helped us to better understand how participants are coping during the pandemic. Questionnaires are an important component of the Harvard Aging Brain Study and can provide information about things like mood, memory concerns, sleep, or physical activity. And many of you have already taken questionnaires at home, whether it was the recent COVID questionnaire or questionnaires that you completed before an annual visit to save time in the clinic. We plan to continue to ask you to complete questionnaires at home, and we'll be able to send them to you via links sent to your email or snail mail. Questionnaires are not only easy to capture remotely, but also can be informative in predicting outcomes in our study. And I wanted to show you an example of this. In the figures shown to the right, we show individuals with elevated amyloid, a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease, compared to those with non-elevated amyloid. And we can see that individuals with elevated amyloid and who report a high level of memory complaints on a questionnaire called the Cognitive Function Index are more likely to have shown cognitive decline over the last several years compared to those with lower memory complaints, despite having elevated amyloid. And by asking participants to complete a simple questionnaire like the Cognitive Function Index, we have a better understanding of which individuals in our study might be at greatest risk for developing symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. So I now turn it over to Dr. Dorene Rentz, who'll be talking about novel cognitive assessments in the Harvard Aging Brain Study.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to add my thanks to all of you for joining this morning and for your loyal dedication to participating in the Harvard Aging Brain Study. Today, I wanted to share with you something that you've been doing in the clinic over the last couple of years, and that is drawing a clock with the use of a digital pen. So we've been collecting this data for the purpose of seeing whether or not this 21st century technology can literally help us to see into how someone completes a task rather than just completing it successfully. And what we found was very exciting, which is why we wanted to share this with you. We've actually submitted this paper to one of the journals a couple of weeks ago. So you're the first to see it in the Harvard Aging Brain Study. And what we found is that the digital clock, using that digital pen, it was better able to discriminate people whose memory is normal for age, in contrast to people who are having more significant memory problem. Almost as good as all the paper and pencil tests that you take when you come to the clinic. But what was really interesting is that when we looked only in the folks who participate in the Harvard Aging Brain Study, we found that this technology, drawing a clock with a digital pen, was actually able to separate those who had high amyloid in their brains versus those who had lower amyloid in their brain. And that's very exciting because we all know that PET scans can be very expensive, and we want to be able to move this type of technology into our primary care offices where they may be able to detect subtle changes even before paper and pencil tests can do so. Next slide. And then finally, this is the last slide for me, is that Dr. Keith Johnson, who you all know runs the PET lab, he and his group were able to actually do some pictures of some brains to show that the digital clock is actually picking up amyloid in the brains of individuals even better than some of our cognitive paper and pencil tests. So again, we're very excited about this technology. And I think what this COVID pandemic has taught us is we need to be able to translate more of this work into the home environment where you live, so that we can be able to continue to understand how the brain is changing with age. So now I want to introduce you to Auburn Samaru, one of our fabulous clinical study coordinators that you'll probably recognize when she appears. And she's been also using technology, in this case, the iPad and the face name test, to look at ways where we can detect subtle cognitive changes over time. So Auburn?
Thank you, Dr. Rentz. So, as Dr. Rentz just discussed, we are introducing more technology into the Harvard Aging Brain Study to pick up on those earliest changes in cognition that could be associated with Alzheimer's disease. We know these changes are very subtle, so one of the ways to detect these changes is to test more frequently. So far, we have loaned 125 iPads to HABS participants to complete a monthly test at home for up to an entire year. People did a few tasks during these assessments, including ones with playing cards, but some of you also completed our classic face name test, where you're asked to remember the names that go with certain faces. Next slide, please. All right, so we know from past research that changes in cognition are tricky to detect over a short time. So instead, we looked at a lack of improvement on a test despite practicing as a subtle indicator of mild memory changes. All of the people included in these figures are cognitively normal and don't have a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment or dementia. People with high levels of amyloid are shown in red, and low amyloid is shown in black. Everyone started these tests at comparable levels. The figure on the left shows how people learn on an annual test in HABS divided by amyloid status. As you can see, it took 2 years to discern between people with high and low amyloid on traditional tests. When we administered the tests monthly, the distinction of amyloid status could be seen in as little as 4 months, which you can see in that middle graph there. The next step is to study if we can see this effect even faster, such as in weekly or daily testing. And we've actually done some preliminary piloting with daily testing, which has looked promising. So now I will hand it over to Dr. Papp to talk about our progress in that arena.
Thank you, Auburn. So the results that Auburn just discussed suggest that capturing information about memory and thinking more frequently may be valuable. So we'd already been thinking about ways to capture cognitive data at home more frequently, but then our desire to innovate got ramped up in the context of the COVID pandemic. So with social distancing, we need ways to assess cognition remotely now more than ever. And so we've been working on BRANCH, which stands for the Boston Remote Assessment for Neurocognitive Health. BRANCH is a cognitive testing on a website that you can do on your own device. And what we plan to do is send you a website link to BRANCH. And if you have a smartphone, you can complete BRANCH on that. However, you can open the link and complete BRANCH tasks on any device, such as an iPad or a desktop computer, as long as it's connected to the internet. Next slide. So for those of you who can see the slides, I'm showing a few of the BRANCH tasks, and BRANCH has some familiar looking tasks like faces and names, but we also have some new ones as well. So you'll see there's groceries here as well as street signs. And we wanted to make tasks related to some of the things that people do in everyday life and also a little more interesting to complete. So we've been working hard on developing these tasks, and we've been piloting them in outside samples. And now what we're hoping to do is send branch to you participants in the Harvard Aging Brain Study, and that will be happening sometime soon. And for those of you who are less tech savvy, don't worry. Our research coordinators will work with you on being able to complete branch in the coming months. Now I'll turn this over to Dr. Sperling.
Thank you so much. I hope that you've just gotten a small taste of the work that everybody is doing to try to, again, take advantage of this very challenging situation to actually accelerate what we have been planning to do in any case, and take advantage of novel remote ways of trying to understand what's happening in people's lives, as well as how they're doing on cognitive and other tests. So we do hope that we're going to be able to restart some limited in-person visits later this summer. The Mass General is starting to bring people back in, both clinically and also in clinical research. We're working very hard to make sure that if people do come in to the Charlestown or the PET facility at MGH, that everybody is safe from the moment they leave their car or transportation. And so we've been working out very detailed plans to make sure that we can do our best to ensure everyone's safety, both the participants, the study partners, and of course also our research staff. If we do open up over the next few weeks, we really are going to focus on the imaging visits to restart. Those generally happen every 3 years for people, and many of you know if yours is coming up. And we'll reach out to you to try to figure out if it's appropriate for you to come and schedule at the best time. Unfortunately, the PET and MRI imaging is one of the few things that we can't do remotely. I've been asking our group to work on tricorders like in Star Trek to be able to detect amyloid and tau without a scanner, but we can't quite do that yet, although we are working on some blood test work that I think is looking very promising, and that's a big part of our renewal over the next 5 years. As you heard, we're really accelerating our work on some of these remote digital assessments, these REDCap surveys, the smartphone, and other digital testing, and we'll also be doing some telephone visits, particularly for those of you who are not able to come in, or certainly if there is a second surge over the course of the next year of the viral pandemic. We are continuing to work very hard on our data analysis. One of the few silver linings of this situation is that we have really been working hard on data we've already collected and starting new projects looking to ask new questions on data that we have collected, and that's helping us to figure out what we should do next. And in this next renewal, the next cycle for 5 years, we had already planned for some exciting new avenues of research. And I'm going to be asking Dr. Jasmeer Chatwal to talk in just a second, because he's been leading one of these new projects that was funded starting in mid-April. And we'll be planning to roll that out over the next year, probably year and a half. And I'll turn it over to Jazz to speak for a moment. Next slide.
Thanks, Reisa, and thanks to all of you guys for being here. Very much appreciative of your time and for your taking part in the study. And with your help, over the last several years, HABS has been contributing to the discussion of how lifestyle and medical factors might impact whether someone develops cognitive impairment. And we've already seen some very eye-opening things. So we've seen that someone's level of physical activity, their level of cardiovascular risk, when they entered HABS had a strong association with whether they had declines in cognitive performance over time. And these are really intriguing findings and may suggest ways that we can reduce people's chances of developing cognitive impairment later, because these are potentially modifiable risk factors. So with that in mind, a major part of our renewal for HABS was to try to build on these findings and put together a dedicated project to examine lifestyle, sleep, and medical factors in all of you. And to do this, we'll take advantage of some new technologies that will allow us to measure physical activities in new and sensitive ways over longer periods of time using special watches, actigraphy watches. And we'll also try to understand how sleep and physical activity may be related. I think all of us know that after a poor night's sleep, our memory and attention isn't quite so good, so we want to understand that a little bit more. So we're going to do this both by using these activity watches, also based on your report, using sleep diaries. And in many of you, we hope to do detailed at-home studies so we can look at electrical patterns in the brain, see how they're related to memory, see how they're related to overall health, and to the buildup of the proteins that we look for on our PET scans. And these studies really will provide a unique window into how potentially modifiable risk factors, such as sleep, vascular health, physical activity, can modify how someone's memory changes over time. So this is really a critical and timely question as we look for new ways to prevent dementia. So you'll hear a lot more about this in the near future. We hope to roll out these measures later this year or early next. And just thank you so much for your time and participation.
All right, next slide. So I think I just wanted to share with you what our mission is. And I heard that one of our participants in a study reminded us that we always hear about essential workers who are out there on the streets and grocery stores, and we don't always realize the essential work that we are trying to do with your help, and that is really to promote healthy brain aging and prevent Alzheimer's symptoms. So our mission over this next cycle, one of the first things we did when we started to work on this grant was say, what can we do to really help the field? What can HABS provide that the field needs to succeed in this mission? And I won't go into this in detail, and this is really Dr. Keith Johnson's brainchild of these four things, but I think we want to be able to go earlier. We want to assess the even earlier stages where amyloid and tau really just start to begin to accumulate, and with better ways of getting PET scans and better analytic methods, we can actually look even earlier and watch this change. And so HABS, as many of you know, is actually going down to age 50 now to be able to look even earlier. We want to go deeper. We want to really improve our understanding of how you get from amyloid and tau and vascular risk to the cognitive problems that many older people develop, and really understand the mechanism so that we can better develop new treatments in the future. We have to go broader. We don't want to just study amyloid and tau and just Alzheimer's disease, but all of the factors that interact. And as you just heard from Dr. Chatwal, vascular disease and sleep and other lifestyles important. And so being able to study those interactions will be critically important to understand the aging brain in the context of these lifestyle issues. And perhaps most importantly, we have to go faster, because we all want to find a successful treatment for Alzheimer's disease. We all want to keep people's brains healthy and happy into the 90s and the 100s and as far as we can. So many of what the techniques that you've heard about today and these digital assessments are really helping us go more efficiently and more rapidly to assess change. And that's really important, not only in the setting of needing remote assessments, but also in future clinical trials. So next slide. This is just to, again, thank you from all of us to all of you. Again, we could not do this without you. We wish we were able to thank you in person. I think it's very ironic that this is called a Food for Thought series, and we're not providing any food at all to you, but we are providing a very small HABS care package that will be sent to you probably in July, maybe early August, with just a few token gifts to thank you, since we can't provide those to you in person, and in including a planting of a tree in your honor, which will be coming down the line as well. So I want to end by, again, thanking you not only for your dedication for the past 10 years, thank you in advance for hoping that you will stick with us and for the next 5 years and help us in our mission. And thank you especially for your attention today, because we do have about 15 minutes or so for questions. And I think Lissa is going to read some of your chat questions. And again, you can also feel free to raise your hand if you prefer to ask a question in person. And for those of you on the phone who can't do that on the webinar, please feel free to call us, leave a message. We really want to make sure that we get everyone's questions answered. I know there are a lot of unknowns yet about what will happen over the next few weeks, months, and even a year due to COVID, and we're happy to answer questions on that, but we don't have all the answers yet. But hopefully we can answer your questions about some of the science. So Lissa, let me turn it back to you to MC this.
All right, we have a very active chat today, which is exciting. So one of the questions that just came up was, we were wondering if there's any research that shows connection between the information we get from a lumbar puncture and cognitive decline.
Yes, maybe I can ask Jazz, Dr. Chatwal or Dr. Yang if he's on, because we have been looking at proteins. Dr. Chatwal has actually looked at some really important data from lumbar punctures from spinal fluid, and now looking at that with blood and also with our PET scans. So Dr. Chatwal, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So there's different ways that we can get at understanding what's going on in the brain. So the brain's different. We can't, if you have a problem in your skin or your kidney, we can take a piece of it or something like that, look at it underneath the microscope. If it's in the blood, we can see things there. With the brain, the closest we can get to that is either by doing a PET scan or looking at cerebrospinal fluid. And over the past several years, the Aging Brain Study, we've looked at how the proteins that we see in cerebrospinal fluid relate to what we see on the imaging. So we know that we can look for the proteins like tau and phospho-tau, the amount of amyloid that's in the cerebrospinal fluid, and it does have a good relationship to what we see on the PET scans. There are actually things that we can look for in the cerebrospinal fluid. We can test it for many different things. So unlike PET scans where we only have one shot at what we're looking at, we can look at a lot of different things in the cerebrospinal fluid. And rest assured, for those of you who have been through it, that we treat the cerebrospinal fluid like gold. We use little bits at a time to try to understand what's going on and save it for years and years. More recently, we've actually started to look at some of these same proteins in the blood. So there's been technological advances that have allowed us to see very small amounts of proteins like amyloid and tau, but also proteins that tell us that there's brain tissue being lost in the blood. And that program has really been expanding, and it's a really exciting time there. So we hope, like Dr. Sperling mentioned, that soon there'll be blood tests that can help take the place of what we do with cerebrospinal fluid, and perhaps even start to do a lot of what we do with PET scans, be able to do in blood. So it's an exciting time.
All right,
Thank
Lissa, next question.
Thank you, Dr. Chatwal. We had a question. Let me scroll up with our very active chat window.
Good.
Thank you to everyone who's participating. This is really exciting to see. We had a question about, when do you notify a study participant of either increased amyloid or cognitive decline?
So maybe I'll take that one first around the increased amyloid. So we do not reveal amyloid or tau or other biomarker status, because again, at this point, even though we know at a group level that increases risk, we don't know what happens at an individual level. And as I mentioned, we actually stay blinded to that information so that we can assess you and do our work without being biased to know who has high amyloid and who doesn't. And that is one of the things that has made the Harvard Aging Brain Study more valuable than almost any other study out there, because of that work to eliminate that bias. We may, when there is something that we have that is successful that can actually change amyloid or change the course of amyloid, if one of these clinical trials is successful, especially a prevention trial, then we will, I'll say, break the blind and work with you and the IRB to make sure that we get that information when it really might change what someone else can do. But the second question is really important, and I think I might ask Dr. Rentz to weigh in here, because we do tell people, and a study partner with your permission, if we're concerned about cognitive decline, because that is something that might require additional workup. So Dr. Rentz, do you want to say anything about that?
Sure. I think when we do the informed consent with you at the beginning of the study, we talk about not being able to reveal amyloid or tau PET scans, but we can reveal other information that is clinically relevant. So things like cognitive tests. I know some of you may have experienced that when we are worried about a dip in your memory or your thinking process, and your study partners have also mentioned a change that they've noticed, we usually bring that to a consensus meeting. That means all the clinicians get together. We look at your tests from before and your current tests, and then we make a decision to contact you to let you know that there's been a change that we're worried about, as well as information to be able to contact your doctor. So your health and safety is paramount to us. You should know that, and we want you to have opportunities to get treatment or even to participate in ways that are important to you. So yes, we will tell you if there's a change in cognition.
Thank you both. We had another question about how many steps should we really be taking? So we've seen, 6,500 steps. Today we saw on a slide 8,900 steps. So how many steps do I need to take a day to stay healthy?
Dr. Chatwal, that's your 8,900 steps. Do you want to address that question?
Absolutely. So that's a good question. So it has a simple answer too, which is every little bit counts, which is that when we looked at participants within HABs, we saw a pretty strong protection against cognitive decline in those that had high levels of amyloid at around 8,200 to 8,900 steps. But what we also saw was that it was a graded response, so that people that had 7,000 steps actually did better than those that had 4,000 steps. So there's no magic number. It's remaining physically active, and these are modest increases over what the average is. So overall in HABs, the average was close to 6,000. So 8,200 or 8,900 isn't that much above that. But the answer is every little bit counts. The more that you can do, the better.
So the right answer is as many as you can. I've been aiming for that 8,900, but I don't always get there, especially these days. All right, next question.
Wonderful. We had a question around how many people are filling out our surveys and how many people we're really reaching. So have we looked into why 60% or so of people aren't answering those surveys?
So maybe I can, I'll ask both Dr. Amariglio and Dr. Vanini to address that. Maybe Dr. Vanini, maybe you can first talk about the subset who did answer the COVID-19 and that they have some slight differences from the overall HABs cohort, but not that much. Yep.
Yeah, so we had, when we sent out the survey, there was a limited time window. We wanted to, of course, get people's responses at the peak of this event. We sent out an email. This was all sent on email. And we had people respond within 2 weeks. So I think we haven't really dug in further into why those 40 or 60% of people didn't respond or open up their emails. It could be different reasons. We've seen some in the chat box here that some people have had their computers at work. There might be security issues why they wouldn't be able to open up their emails. We're trying, of course, going further or going forward to see if there is better way connecting with you, of which way is better, to send it via email or to send it pen and paper version. But I think this was I think it was anyway a good response from being a very, very quick survey that we put together and sending it out. Not all of you are familiar with this way of communicating with us. So I think we're still learning, all of us, of how to best do this.
Dr. Amariglio, maybe you want to speak to this. I know you've done a lot of at-home surveys, some with excellent response. And
right. Yeah, just like Dr. Vanini was pointing out, this was kind of a spontaneous questionnaire without much warning or much time to complete. Unlike this optional survey that was just sent out, surveys where individuals have recently been in the clinic and are informed that they will be getting, or at least gotten calls that they have an upcoming appointment, that has a much higher completion rate. Just, I think, because there's a little bit more contact, and it's sent around the time in which people are doing their annual visit. And so there's also a smaller group of individuals within HABs that have taken questionnaires at home on a much more frequent basis, and we've had very high completion rate on that. And again, these are people that sort of in advance were notified and kind of given more warning, and I think we're doing a pretty good job in that case. So I think that that's part of the difference between the two different questionnaires.
Great. And also I want to say that I know many of our coordinators have been calling you, and one of the things we want to know is how you want to be contacted. Some people prefer by email, some people prefer by phone, some people prefer by getting something in the mail, and it is our intent to make sure we can gather information from all HABs participants in the way that they prefer. So we'll be asking you more about your preferences for that and trying to get information from everybody who is willing over these next few months. So I think, Alyssa, we might have time for one or two more questions. I don't want to keep people past the time. Please
Wonderful.
Go ahead. Yeah.
We certainly have a few more, so I'll try to consolidate a couple of them because we got a lot of curiosity around our steps and our physical activity. So if maybe we don't walk all day long, maybe we prefer a stationary bike or some other type of exercise. Is there a way that we can kind of quantify what is enough exercise if we're not measuring steps?
Maybe I'll take that one quick because it's something I get asked in the clinic all of the time, especially on bikes and other activities. So one thing is I was always told by my colleagues who work in exercise that what you ideally want to do is break a sweat 4 or 5 times a week, get to the point that you're actually pushing yourself a little bit or getting a little out of breath. And I don't know how that corresponds to steps, but I think that's been good advice in the exercise world, that you actually are getting to the point that you're using oxygen utilization well. Jazz, is that a fair comment on other exercise more generally?
Yes, it is. And I think, so roughly 2,000 to 2,500 steps is a mile based on the conversions. I do think that some of the steps research suggests that it doesn't have to be very high intensity activity. It can be, that's fine. But even modest but long durations of activity can be helpful. And again, every little bit counts. You don't have to get to a certain threshold to get a benefit. You're getting incremental benefits as you increase your activity.
Great. Alyssa, any other questions?
I think we have an important one that is probably going to be good for everybody to hear. We'd like to know how these next 5 years are going to be different from a participant's perspective. So what can they look forward to?
Absolutely. So that's an excellent question. So I'd say the first thing that will be different is we will be interacting with you more remotely, at least some of the time. And we hope that that won't be for a long time, but I do think that we have to be prepared for times where we won't be able to see you in person. And even when we will see you in person, I think that this COVID has taught us that we need to be adaptive, that we need to make the best of these times and try to get information. I think the second thing, we will continue imaging and cognitive tests because it's critically important. For some people, we'll be following you up to 15 years. And the estimates have been from other studies which started with spinal fluid that it really may take 15 to even 18 years to be able to see somebody from the early part of amyloid accumulation to when, unfortunately, they really develop symptoms. So that will be the same over the next 5 years, at least intermittently trying to get some of the same tests. And then finally, as I hope you heard, I think one of the things that'll be different is we're going to try to understand more about the rest of their lives, their environment, how their lifestyle, their sleep, their home environment, more with these actigraphy watches, and also more questionnaires potentially about other things going on in people's lives, stress, resilience, wisdom, because we are realizing that all of the things we're learning about the brain, amyloid and tau and vascular, happen in the setting of a real life. And we're really trying to understand that. So I think you'll see more questionnaires about broader aspects of your life. One thing that will not change is the amazing people on this webinar who you get to interact with. Some of them will go off to school. Some of them are coming back from school and rejoining us. But our commitment to seeing you, being with you, and to making the very most of your very valuable dedication and commitment will not change. Because again, we can't do it without you. And I hope that we all miss you. I have to say, it's been really hard not to see participants in person. We miss each other, but we really miss seeing you. And so hopefully as soon as it's safe, we'll see many of you over time, because I hope that that personal connection we have with many of you will not change. Any other questions that are urgent, or shall we let people go get their own food, since sadly we were not able to provide it?
No other burning questions at the moment. We have some folks we're going to follow up with, but everybody is very glad that they could attend. So I'm glad that we could see everybody. It's been really, really lovely to connect this way.
Great. And I know there will be more food for thought coming virtually. I think we're going to do it every month this summer. So you'll be hearing via email and invites about some other exciting topics. Again, as soon as it's safe, we'll be reaching out to at least a few of you to see if you want to be able to come in very safely to resume some work this summer. But I imagine it will be months and perhaps more than a year until we really get back to normal procedures. So we hope you'll stick with us, and we're so grateful. I hope, if nothing else, you hear how much we've realized how your dedication and commitment make this possible. So we look forward to seeing you virtually soon and in person as soon as we can. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.